Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name is Lefebvre, and today we are going to be addressing some of the struggles you guys expressed to me in our Q&A video that I didn't have the chance to get around to. So today we're going to be talking all about those techniques. So let's jump in and get started. Okay friends, so today I am addressing your struggles. I got about 4 different technique questions in my Q&A video that I am going to talk about today. And for this video, I thought it would be a good idea to paint in my Canson XL watercolor paper sketchbook, because this tends to be a lot of people's first paper, which I don't necessarily recommend. If you are going to splurge on any item or any material or supply for watercolor, good paper is always going to make it easier to work on. But this is what I used first, and a lot of us have access to. So today I'm going to demonstrate these techniques on this paper to hopefully help with some of those struggles. I have my Shinhan watercolors, and then I have about 3 different brush sizes here. I have a size 10, a size 12, and size 4, and I'm going to address why I have different brushes through one of the questions, but let's get started. So the first question I got is, when I paint, I quickly get a solid line, even if I'm trying to blend or doing wet on wet. So I have this area here that I've already painted, and what I assume is happening through that struggle is that, one, the person isn't necessarily working fast enough, but that's not necessarily the struggle. It's your paint is drying too quick. And that could be because of the climate. So the area that you're painting in, maybe your paint is drying too quick, or you don't use enough water. So I think what they were saying is that they get a solid line. So when they try to continue to blend out, maybe they have this line underneath. Now, actually, it lifts quite easily on this paper just because this paper is a cellulose paper. The paint and water tend to sit on top. It's actually a little bit easier to lift that color, but you can still see a faint line under there. But the way to combat this struggle is to get a decent amount of water on your brush. Okay, you really want to wet it up, especially if you're working in a drier climate. So you want enough water that you can really kind of take the time to blend and add your paint, especially if you are newer to watercolor. You're going to work a little bit slower. I tend to go really fast because this has become second nature to me. But usually when we're starting out, we're so careful with our lines. And if we take our time to really lay down that paint, it's going to dry really fast. And that's when you get some of those really harsh lines. So use a decent amount of water so you can really spend time, going back and adding more color. And so when you go back to do wet on wet, it just kind of blends and it's still wet. You won't get these kind of fun explosions of color if your paint or your surface is dry. So you need to work a little bit faster, and you need to add a little bit more water. Now, water control is probably the trickiest part of watercolor, because what you don't want to happen is have so much water where it's pooling, because I'm going to show you what happens when you have so much water on your paper that it pools. Okay, you see how they have this like puddle to the side? If I go and try to add in my explosions, it doesn't do the same thing as it does if we have less. Okay, there's less water over here. There's a pool here. See, it doesn't do the same thing. It just sits in the puddle, which you don't want. What you're looking for when you are, wetting up a background is you want this nice sheen to your paper. So we want to kind of mop up any of these pools. So I'm just going to wash off my brush a little bit. I'm going to dry my brush, and I'm just going to kind of lift some of that water. Okay, and you can tell whether or not you have a puddle if you tilt your paper to the side and it pools or not. Okay, see how there's no more pools, but you have this nice shine across that wet area, and that is what you're looking for. Okay, so a decent amount of water where it's not pooling, but where you get a nice shine. Okay, and then once you add, your wet on wet, you should get these really nice kind of explosions of color. And I'm using Prussian blue right now, in case you're wondering. Okay, so that's kind of how you need to work with it. When you go back in, so say I also have seen this struggle. So say someone's doing, it's hard to replicate the struggles when it has become second nature to you, but I've seen this happen. I'm going to try and use less water to show you, where they do, an outline of a leaf like this. They're working really slow. And then they try and go back in and then like fill it in, and you get this harsh line is what I think is happening sometimes. Okay. 1, I'm going a little bit too slow, but 2, I don't have enough water on my brush. So the area is not very wet. It's drying really quickly. And that's when you get these really defined lines. So you want a little bit more water, not a ton, just a little bit. And you really kind of want to wet the area up so it all kind of merges into one. So even if you do your outline for your leaf like that, and it takes you a little bit of time, have enough water on your brush that you can really kind of just blend it out. Okay, spend time blending those lines together. Work a little bit on the quicker side, but spend time making it all the same amount of wetness and blending it out. All right. Okay, so that's what you want to do. You want to add enough water. Again, not too much where it's pooling, because that's when you also get those weird kind of blooms. Blooms happen, you can already see it kind of starting to form, when you have a lot of water in one area and then it starts to dry in another area. That creates separation between the pigments and you get these kind of cauliflower blooms. I don't know if you can kind of see that starting to work. See how it's already lighter there? And that's when you get those harsh edges. The goal is to make the whole area the same amount of wetness. So really you can dry off your brush if there's too much water and move it all around so it is all the same amount of wetness in that area. Okay? So I think that's the struggle that they were trying to express. Hopefully it is. If not, let me know in the comments. All right. The second struggle, someone said, I also struggle with loose backgrounds. I never have enough paint mixed and have issues with dropping in color at the right consistency to get a deep value enough without blooms. So again, this is a water control issue. So mix your paper. So what I think they're trying to say is when they're trying to do a background, so let's say, I'm just grabbing whatever color's in here. They're doing a background and they want to drop in a darker color. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to have enough paint mixed beforehand. Okay, so I don't even know what colors I'm using here, because you want that deep color without the blooms. So see, I have this really dark color that I want to drop in. Now, what I think happens with a lot of beginners is they still have too much water on their brush. So when you're trying to drop in a darker color to get those darker shadows, you want just the paint, not a lot of water, because what water does is it lightens up your color and it also pushes away pigment. So if I have a really, really wet brush and my darker color and my surface is not as wet as this paint that I'm about to put on, I'm trying to make it not work. It's going to push the pigment away. I don't know if you guys can see this. This is already starting to dry. It's going to push the pigment away, separate it, and it's also not going to be as dark. Okay, because I have a lot of water on my brush, which lightens your color. So what I always suggest, let me just kind of blend all this together. What I suggest doing is if you want to get that deeper, darker color, so say we're trying to do, those dark kind of trees, out of focus trees. It looks like I have this really dark paint, but it's not really showing up on here. There's too much water there. What I need you to do, mix your dark color. So my brush is wet. It's not soaking wet. I dabbed it on my paper towel. I'm going to go right into my color to make it as dark as possible. Then I might have a lot of water on my brush. I'm going to either wash off my brush and kind of dry it. So I just pick up the color, okay? And it should be darker. See that? You want to release the water from your brush before you pick up the dark pigment. Or what you can do is you have your dark color here, tap your brush on your paper towel, and that releases some of the water, but still remains with the dark pigment. So this is if you're trying to do wet on wet and get, those out of focus trees, and you're really trying to achieve those dark colors, but it's just not getting as dark as you want it to. You have too much water in your puddle and your brush, so it's making it lighter. So you need to release that water. Wash off your brush, dry it. Then pick up just the color. Okay, and you get those really nice dark pigments. So try to mix enough color in your well with more pigment than water. Okay, I hope that is what you were trying to say, and I hope that addresses that issue. And so the blooms, like we were talking about here, blooms happen when we have too much water. Okay, so see how big this already is? I have too much water on my brush. It's always a good idea to tap off your brush, then look at the difference. It's so much smaller. Okay, when in doubt, run your brush on the side of your jar to release some of the water. Even tap it on your paper towel, then go into your painting. Okay, water control is huge, and it just will become second nature the more you do it, but really kind of get used to tapping your brush on your paper towel to release some of that excess water. Unless you're looking to cover a really large surface area with water and you need a lot of water on your brush. Okay. So the next struggle was blending. Someone said, blending seems so difficult for me. You make it look so easy. Okay. Blending, again, this is all just kind of comes back to water control. So one of the ways that I like to demonstrate blending is with leaves. So usually when I'm doing like a leaf, so say we have our light color leaf here, and I always like to have, a deeper, darker color at the base of my leaf to get that nice shadow. Okay, and this is where it gets tricky. So the first thing you want to do is make sure, because we're going to be doing some wet on wet, I'm going to show you blending wet on wet and then wet on dry to get two different effects. So again, when we're doing wet on wet, we want to make sure our leaf has that nice sheen over the whole leaf. It needs to be all evenly wet. Okay, you don't want any puddles or pools. Okay, and now we want to add in some darker color. Again, like we were talking here, you don't want more water on your brush than is on the paper. You want the goal to be everything has to be evenly wet. So I'm going to grab my darker color. So I have this dark green right here. Okay. And I'm not going to go right into here because there's probably too much water on my brush. Again, get used to tapping your brush on your paper towel to release some of that water. Then you can add the pigment. Okay, I'll show you also what it looks like if you have too much water, like this. And even though it's wet on wet and it's gonna have a softer edge, we wanna kind of blend this dark edge out. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, wash off my brush completely, run it against the side of my jar, tap it on my paper towel, dry it, okay? Then with really light pressure, especially on this paper because the paint and the water tend to sit on top rather than soak in, really light pressure, I'm just going to kind of buff out this line between light and dark. Really light pressure, like super, super light, and you'll get a softer edge. Now I'm going to show you what's going to happen if you don't do this, okay? So that's a nice blend. If I were to go back in with, let's start from the beginning. If I were to grab a piece of paper towel, okay, let's try this again. The beginner way. So we have our leaf here. We have it all one color. Maybe there's a little bit too much water, and we want to add in our dark color. Even this, like tilted to the side, if you see it pooling, that's a little bit too much water. Okay, so now I go to mix my darker green, and I go right into here. Actually, that's not even that much water. Hold on. I'm just used to doing water control. Okay, so you have too much. Okay. If I tilt this to the side, you can, I don't know if you can see that. There is a puddle there. which means, okay, see how you can see the dark part here? You can also tell because of the way it kind of turns or like flows. There's too much water there. I added too much water with my dark green. I didn't tap it on my paper towel first. So now what happens when this dries, you're going to get a really harsh line between this dark green and the light green because this is going to dry first. It has less water, and this is going to dry a lot slower. It causes that bloom and that separation. Okay, so we didn't tap it on our paper towel. That's key one, what you have to do. And then blending, what I see with a lot of beginners, they have too much pressure on their brush. They're pressing too hard when they blend. So they're going like this. When you press too hard with your brush, you apply pressure, what that actually does is it lifts paint. So you can lift. That's a technique that you can actually use to your advantage. Lifting with your brush, look, I can get rid of a bunch of that color by lifting. So that's why you need to be so gentle when you're blending, because applying pressure with a clean, damp brush will actually lift color. So when blending, key one is tapping your brush off on your paper towel to release some of that water before you add in the darker color or with your darker color on your brush. 2 is really, really light pressure when you're blending out that line, okay? And that's doing blending from wet on wet. If we are doing blending from, I like to add sometimes shadows to my leaves after they've dried, so let's do it on these ones. So I will take some of my dark color. Okay, again, I don't want a lot of water on my brush. I'll show you what happens. I have 2 here, so I'll show you what happens. Okay, I have a lot of water on my brush, and I'm trying to add in my darker color. I'm gonna wash off my brush, dry it, and then I try and blend, but I'm using too much pressure. It just lifts the color. It's not gonna work. And then we're gonna have a little pool right here. It won't blend nicely. What you wanna do, mix your dark color up. I tend to just like wash off and dry off my brush and then go right into that wet paint puddle. Again, just tap it gently. I'll add my dark color here. Now quickly, to blend this out, what I need to do, wash off my brush, dry it, okay? And I will slowly blend out that line. Now this darker color, because it's on a dry surface, is gonna wanna flow wherever there's water. So see, it's still a harsh line. What I need to keep doing is washing my brush off, drying it, moving that line. Okay, again, wash, dry, move that line. Your watercolor wants to flow wherever there is water. So it will go as far as it is wet. Okay, so we're just kind of blending it out. Really light pressure. And then to move that line, you just wash off your brush, dry it, and kind of keep blending out that line, because you don't want to bring the dark pigment all the way over, but washing off, taking off that pigment off your brush and drying it on your brush and then moving that kind of wet line will allow for a really nice soft blend. It is harder on this paper. It's not as seamless. I also should have gone the other way just because it's hard to blend that way for me. I don't know why. If I want to keep going a little bit more. Okay. There's a dark. Wash, dry, and soften out that edge. Again, wash, dry, soften out that edge. The key is not having water on your brush to do this. You just have a damp brush that you're softening out that edge, and you should get a nice bleed or a nice blend. Okay. All right. So there we've addressed blending. And then the last question I got was, as I progress from going from tutorials to my own painting, how do I know what to paint? How do I know what paint colors to use and what brushes to use? So the beauty of working with your own composition and your own ideas is you can use whatever colors you want. Okay, so if you're not following a tutorial, you have full creative control over what you use. It's up to you. There's no set, rules of what colors you need to use in your own painting. So if you're trying to do more of, a moody dark sky, you might want, more cooler colors like blues. If you're trying to give a little bit more warmth to, say, your landscapes, you might want to use more yellows or even some greens that have a bit more yellows or oranges to them. It's totally up to you. Using certain colors in your own composition is completely in your control. And my suggestion with that is just kind of, trying out different things and seeing what kind of feelings you want to express in your painting. Try different things. Play time with your paints is probably the biggest thing when coming up with your own paintings. And as for brushes, how do you know what brushes to use? The bigger the surface area you're trying to cover, the larger the brush you're going to use. The smaller the surface area, the smaller the brush you're going to use. So if you're doing a background, you're going to want to use a big brush. You can use a big brush like this size 12 round. You could also use, if you have one, like a really large area, you can use like a really big, large wash brush. If you're trying to do, maybe a background sky and you just want a little bit more of a flat wash, using a flat brush like that can work. But if you're trying to do smaller, more detailed areas, you're going to want to use a smaller brush. So that's how you kind of figure out what brushes you're going to need. It's really great also just to kind of take a day to play with your materials to see what your brushes can do, because then you can use them for different effects. There are no set rules of what brush you need to use for a certain thing. It's whatever works for you. So take the time to really play, see what they do, and then determine what you need based off your own experiences. Okay? Don't follow anyone else's rules. See what works for you and use it that way. So I hope those tips were helpful for some of these struggles. If you have any other struggles you'd like me to address in future videos, please let me know in the comments below. And that's about it. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.